won't back down. Iranian leader says no country can deprive it of its nuclear enrichment rights. On February 20th, 2026, while the President of the United States sat in a room discussing peace, Iran's atomic energy chief looked into a camera and said 7 words that should have stopped every student of scripture in their tracks. No country can deprive Iran of its nuclear enrichment rights. That was not a private negotiation leak. That was broadcast, a public declaration of defiance from the nation the Bible calls Persia, delivered the same week the United States launched its largest military buildup in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. You will be shocked when you find 5 facts about this. Number 1. Iran's firm stance. Iran's Atomic Energy Organization chief, Mohammad Eslami, did not merely state a diplomatic position, and it did not come alone. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei reinforced the message on February 17th, calling uranium enrichment an undeniable right, and Iran's ballistic missiles essential for deterrence. He dismissed American demands as irrelevant to Iran's sovereign decision-making. When the supreme leader of Iran and the head of its nuclear program both make the same declaration within the same week, that is not mixed messaging. That is unified national resolve. But here is what elevates this from a diplomatic dispute to a prophetic signal. This defiance was not issued from a position of weakness. Iran is not cornered and desperate. Iran is rebuilding. After the 2025 conflict with Israel, which included Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear sites during what was called the 12-Day War, Iran has been actively reconstituting its capabilities. Damaged sites are being repaired. Enrichment activities are resuming. Stockpiles of 60% enriched uranium, dangerously close to weapons grade, are being replenished. Iran is not backing down because Iran believes it is getting stronger. And that belief, whether accurate or not, is creating exactly the kind of escalation pressure that Ezekiel described. But before we open the Bible, you need to see what the other side of this standoff looks like. Because the American response to Iran's defiance is not diplomatic. It is military, and the scale of it is staggering. News correspondent covering the buildup described the scene with a single word that captures the entire moment: surreal. And she was right. Because what is happening right now in the Middle East defies normal logic. 2 completely contradictory realities are operating simultaneously, in the same government, at the same time. In one room, President Trump presides over the Board of Peace. Diplomacy is discussed. Frameworks are negotiated. Language is carefully crafted. The appearance of progress is maintained. Talks between the United States and Iran, mediated indirectly through Oman, resumed in early February. A second round in Geneva on February 17th was described as positive with good progress. Iran promised a written proposal. The diplomatic machinery is running. In another room, the United States military is executing the largest air and naval surge in the Middle East since the eve of the 2003 Iraq invasion. Carrier strike groups are repositioning. Fighter squadrons are deploying at a pace not seen in over 2 decades. Refueling tankers are establishing air bridges capable of sustaining prolonged combat operations thousands of miles from American soil. And unmarked aircraft carrying U.S. Special Operations Forces have been spotted landing in Israel. Peace in one room, war preparation in the next. And the wall between them is getting thinner by the day. The message to Iran is simple: make a deal. or face the consequence of not making one. But here is the problem with that strategy, and this connects directly to what we will uncover in Discovery 7. When you apply overwhelming pressure to a nation that has publicly declared it will not back down, you do not create compliance. You create the conditions for escalation. You create hooks in the jaw. History rarely moves in one direction at a time. It moves in contradictions. Peace talks and war preparations, diplomacy and deployment, handshakes and missile locks. And the Bible describes exactly this kind of moment with a precision that should make everyone watching pay very close attention. But first, you need to see the numbers, because the scale of what the United States has moved into the region is not symbolic. It is operational, and it tells you everything about what Washington believes is possible in the next few weeks. The numbers speak for themselves, and they are not subtle. The Pentagon has deployed more than 120 warplanes to the Middle East. 50 of those aircraft were moved in a single 48-hour window. That is not routine rotation. That is rapid force projection at a pace that signals imminent operational capability. Here is what was deployed: 48 F-15 fighter jets, the backbone of American air superiority for decades. Each one capable of carrying precision-guided munitions designed to penetrate hardened underground facilities, exactly the kind of facilities Iran uses to house its centrifuges and enrichment infrastructure. 18 F-35 stealth fighters, the most advanced combat aircraft in the world, designed to operate inside heavily defended airspace without being detected. If a strike on Iranian nuclear sites is being planned, the F-35 is the aircraft that goes in first. 22 KC-135 refueling tankers. This is the detail most people overlook, and it is the one that tells you the most about what is being prepared. Refueling tankers form what the military calls an air bridge. They allow combat aircraft to operate at extreme range for sustained periods. You do not deploy 22 tankers for a single sortie. You deploy them for a campaign, a sustained, multi-day, around-the-clock air operation. A squadron of F-22 Raptors, the most dominant air superiority fighter ever built. Its purpose is to ensure that no enemy aircraft interferes with the strike package. When F-22s are deployed, the message is clear. The airspace will belong to the United States. 6 E-3 Sentry airborne warning and control systems. These are flying command centers. They provide real-time battle management, tracking every aircraft, every missile, every threat in the operational area simultaneously. 6 of them deployed to a single theater means the United States is building the infrastructure for a complex, multi-axis aerial campaign. And then there is the USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest aircraft carrier ever constructed. Its strike group was approaching the Strait of Gibraltar on February 20th, with its final destination undetermined. It could pass through the Suez Canal and position itself closer to Iran. It could remain in the eastern Mediterranean to protect Israel. Either way, it joins the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group already operating in the Arabian Sea. 2 carrier strike groups in the same theater, at the same time. You do not move this much air power unless you are prepared to use it. But here is what you are not seeing, and this detail matters enormously. There is no buildup of U.S. ground forces that would indicate a ground invasion. No armored columns staging in Kuwait. No infantry divisions deploying to forward bases. This is not 2003. There are no plans to march on Tehran. This is air, missile, naval, precision-focused, designed to destroy specific targets, specific facilities, specific capabilities, without occupying a single square mile of Iranian territory. And that kind of operation can be launched in hours, not weeks. The military infrastructure for a strike on Iran's nuclear program is in place. The only question remaining is whether the order will be given. And that depends entirely on what happens in the next 10 days, because the clock Trump set is already running. The Strait of Hormuz is a choke point. Roughly 20 to 30% of the world's oil supply passes through this narrow waterway every single day. Any disruption, any conflict, any mining operation, any blockade in the Strait of Hormuz would send energy prices into a spiral that affects every nation on Earth. Gas prices in Winnipeg, heating costs in Berlin, manufacturing in Shanghai. The global economy runs through a passage that is only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Iran knows this, and by conducting joint drills with Russia in and around the strait, Iran is delivering a message that transcends military capability. It is saying, if you strike our nuclear facilities, we will make the entire world pay the price. The Strait of Hormuz is Iran's leverage. It is the one card Iran holds that can hurt not just Israel, not just the United States, but every oil-dependent economy on the planet. This is not just regional, it is global leverage. And here is what ties this directly to what we will uncover in Discovery 6. The fact that Russia is participating in these drills is not incidental. It is the most significant detail in this entire story. Because Ezekiel 38 does not describe Iran acting alone. It describes Iran acting as part of a coalition. And the leader of that coalition comes from the far north. Russia and Iran conducting joint military exercises in the most strategically important waterway on Earth is not just a military event. It is an alignment. The same alignment Ezekiel described 2,600 years ago. But before we open the Bible, there is one more piece of the current situation you need to understand. Because the phrase enrichment rights sounds diplomatic and technical, but what it actually means in military terms is far more alarming than most people realize. This is where the diplomatic language breaks down and the military reality takes over. Because when Iran says no country can deprive it of its enrichment rights, most people hear a bureaucratic dispute about international law. But that is not what this is about. This is about one thing: breakout time. Uranium enrichment is the process of refining natural uranium to increase the concentration of the fissile isotope, uranium-235. At low levels, around 3 to 5%, enriched uranium is used for nuclear power generation, peaceful energy, civilian infrastructure. At 20%, it enters a gray zone. At 60%, it is dangerously close to weapons grade. And at 90%, it is weapons grade material suitable for a nuclear warhead. Iran has previously maintained stockpiles of uranium enriched to 60%, approximately 400 kilograms. That is close enough to weapons grade that the technical steps remaining to reach 90% are relatively small and could be completed quickly. How quickly? Weeks, not years, not months, weeks. That gap between 60% enrichment and a functional nuclear weapon is what analysts call breakout time. And that is what this entire standoff is really about. Iran says enrichment is a sovereign right under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And technically, under certain interpretations of the NPT, peaceful nuclear enrichment is permitted. But the United States and Israel do not believe Iran's program is peaceful. They believe the 60% stockpile, the hardened underground facilities, the ballistic missile program designed to carry nuclear warheads, and the history of concealment and deception all point to one conclusion. Iran is building the capability to produce a nuclear weapon, even if it has not assembled one yet. This is not about energy. It is about breakout time. And every day that Iran enriches further, that breakout window gets smaller. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi clarified on February 20th that the United States had not demanded zero enrichment in the current talks. Iran has proposed limited concessions, a temporary halt to enrichment for 3 to 5 years, diluting the 60% stockpile, perhaps a regional enrichment facility on Iranian soil with international oversight. But none of these proposals meet the red lines that Israel's Prime Minister outlined in his February meetings with Trump. Complete dismantlement, removal of all enriched material, no enrichment capability whatsoever. The gap between what Iran is offering and what Israel demands is not a gap that can be closed with creative diplomacy. It is a chasm, and chasms do not produce compromise. They produce confrontation. And here is what should arrest your attention as a student of Scripture. The nation that is building this capability, the nation that refuses to back down, the nation at the center of the most dangerous nuclear standoff on Earth, is the nation Ezekiel named by its ancient identifier 2,600 years ago. Now we open the Bible. And what you are about to see is not interpretation layered on top of current events. It is not a symbolic reading forced onto modern headlines. It is a name, written in ancient Hebrew, referring to a specific geographical territory, a specific people, a specific nation, a nation that is on your screen right now. Ezekiel 38:5. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Persia, written in the Hebrew text as Paras, and this is where most people underestimate what Ezekiel actually did, because the Bible is filled with prophetic language that requires interpretation, symbols, numbers, beasts, imagery that scholars spend careers decoding. But Ezekiel 38 is different. Ezekiel does not describe the threat to Israel in symbolic terms. He names nations directly by their ancient identifiers, and one of those names requires zero interpretation. The ancient Persian Empire occupied the exact geographical territory that modern Iran occupies today. The heartland of Persia was centered in what is now the Fars province of Iran. The name Persia was the official designation of the nation in international diplomacy, in maps, in treaties, and in everyday usage until 1935, when Reza Shah Pahlavi formally requested the international community to refer to the country as Iran, from the Persian word Aryan, meaning land of the Aryans. But in the Hebrew scriptures and in the prophetic timeline, Persia and Iran are one and the same. There is no scholarly debate about this identification. It is not symbolic. It is not metaphorical. It does not require a theological position or a particular eschatological framework to accept. Every serious biblical scholar, whether they are premillennial, amillennial, or postmillennial, whether they hold a dispensationalist or covenant theology, acknowledges that Paras in Ezekiel 38:5 refers to the geographical territory of modern Iran. It is as straightforward as identifying Egypt or Babylon in the Old Testament. The name is the name. And here is what makes this identification so extraordinary in the context of what we have covered so far. Ezekiel wrote this prophecy approximately 2,600 years ago. At that time, the Persian Empire was one of the most powerful civilizations on Earth. It was the empire of Cyrus the Great, the ruler who actually freed the Jewish exiles from Babylonian captivity. Persia was not Israel's enemy in Ezekiel's day. It was Israel's liberator. Cyrus is called God's anointed in Isaiah 45:1. The relationship between Israel and Persia was favorable, but Ezekiel, writing under divine inspiration, looked forward in time and described a future moment when Persia would be part of a hostile coalition marching against Israel. That made no sense in Ezekiel's era. Persia was an ally, a benefactor. The idea that Persia would one day turn against the nation it had just helped restore would have seemed as unlikely to Ezekiel's contemporaries as Russia and America fighting on the same side would have seemed during the Cold War. And yet, here we are, 26 centuries later. The regime funds and arms Hezbollah, Hamas, and other organizations whose stated purpose is the elimination of the Jewish state. Ezekiel saw this turn 2,600 years before it happened. And Ezekiel does not describe Persia as a passive participant. He describes Persia as an active, armed member of a military coalition. The phrase "with shield and helmet" is military language. That is not a nation observing from the sidelines. That is a nation geared for war. That is a nation marching in formation. That is a nation prepared to fight. Now think about what Iran declared this week. No country can deprive Iran of its nuclear enrichment rights. That is not diplomatic hedging. That is defiance. That is a nation that has made its decision and will not be moved from it. And it is the same nation Ezekiel named 2,600 years ago as part of the coalition that comes against Israel in the latter years. But here is what makes this even more significant, and this is something most people miss entirely when they read Ezekiel 38:5. The verse does not just name Persia, it names Persia alongside other nations, Ethiopia, Libya. These are coalition partners. Persia is not a lone wolf in this prophecy. It is part of an alliance. And the leader of that alliance, the Gog of the land of Magog, described in the verses directly above, comes from a direction that Ezekiel identifies with a specificity that eliminates ambiguity. The far north, the uttermost north. And when you see who that northern leader is, and what that leader's nation is doing with Persia right now, today, in February of 2026, you will understand why this is not just a name in an old book. It is a pattern unfolding in real time. One of the few modern nations named explicitly in end times prophecy is the same nation that stood in front of cameras this week and declared it will not back down. And it is not acting alone. This is where the prophecy and the headlines converge so closely that you have to deliberately look away to miss it. Because Ezekiel does not just name Persia, he describes an entire coalition, a multinational military alliance. And when you trace the ancient names to their modern equivalents, and then overlay what those nations are doing together right now, in February of 2026, the alignment is not subtle. It is staring you in the face. Ezekiel 38, 2-6. Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. And I will turn thee back, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them. all of them with shield and helmet, Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. Now let me trace these names on a modern map, because each one deepens the pattern. Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. This is the leader of the coalition, and Ezekiel gives us a geographical marker that eliminates most of the guesswork. Ezekiel 38:15. And thou shalt come from thy place out of the north parts, thou, and many people with thee, all of them riding upon horses, a great company, and a mighty army. The far north, the uttermost north. Most scholars, across virtually every theological tradition, identify Magog with the regions north of the Black Sea and the Caucasus, territories that correspond to modern Russia. The ancient historian Josephus linked Magog to the Scythians, nomadic peoples who inhabited the regions north of the Black Sea, the exact territory that is now southern Russia and Ukraine. Meshech and Tubal are ancient regions in what is now central and eastern Turkey, but the prince who rules over them comes from the uttermost north. Here is the test. Take a globe. Place your finger on Jerusalem. Draw a line directly north. That line passes through Lebanon, through Syria, through Turkey, through the Black Sea, and arrives at Moscow. Moscow sits almost directly north of Jerusalem. No other major world capital occupies that geographical position with such precision. Russia is the leader of the coalition, coming from the far north. And right now, Russia is not a distant, disconnected observer of the Iran crisis. Russia is participating in joint military exercises with Iran in the Strait of Hormuz. This week, February 2026. Live fire drills, ship seizures, anti-ship missile exercises, coordinated air, sea, and special forces operations. Russian warships operating alongside Iranian IRGC Navy forces in the most strategically significant waterway on Earth. That is not a distant geopolitical connection. That is an active military partnership between the two nations Ezekiel placed at the center of his coalition. The leader from the far north and Persia, operating together, training together, preparing together. Right now, Persia, Iran, named directly, no ambiguity. We covered this in full in Discovery 6. The nation that declared this week it will not back down is the same nation Ezekiel named as a coalition partner 2,600 years ago. Cush, often translated as Ethiopia in English Bibles, but in the ancient world, Cush referred to the regions south of Egypt, modern Sudan, and parts of East Africa. And it is worth noting that Sudan has had a complex and shifting relationship with Iran for years, including periods of military cooperation and weapons smuggling through Sudanese territory. Put, Libya and possibly broader North Africa. Libya has been in a state of civil fragmentation since 2011, creating a power vacuum that external actors, including Russia, through its Wagner Group, and more recently, the Africa Corps, have actively exploited. Russian military presence in Libya is not theoretical. It is documented, and it places Russian-aligned forces in the exact geographical territory Ezekiel identified as part of the coalition. Gomer, ancient territory in what is now central Turkey and parts of Eastern Europe. The first-century historian Josephus identified Gomer with the Galatians of Asia Minor, which corresponds to modern central Turkey. Togarmah of the North Quarters, also identified with regions in eastern Turkey, Armenia, and the Caucasus. The phrase North Quarters reinforces the northern geographical orientation of the entire coalition. Turkey, Armenia, the Caucasus, all north of Israel, all in the zone Ezekiel described. So the coalition on a modern map reads like this: Russia as the leader, Iran as the named partner, Turkey represented through multiple ancient identifiers, Libya and Sudan as additional allies, and the phrase at the end of verse 6, and many people with thee, additional nations, unnamed but present, joining the coalition as it forms. And that is exactly what we are watching. But here is where the prophecy moves from pattern to mechanism. Because Ezekiel does not say these nations carefully plan their invasion of Israel through calculated strategic decision-making. He says something far more unsettling. He says God pulls them into it. Ezekiel 38:4, "And I will turn thee back, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords." Hooks in the jaw. That image should haunt every political analyst watching the current situation, because it describes nations being dragged toward a confrontation by forces they do not fully control. A massive creature with a hook lodged in its mouth, being pulled forward, not choosing its own path, being drawn, compelled, dragged by pressures and circumstances that feel like strategic decisions, but are ultimately orchestrated by a power beyond any government or military. God says, "I will bring thee forth." Not you will choose to come, I will bring you. The sovereignty behind this invasion belongs to God. The nations think they are acting on their own interests. But behind every strategic calculation, behind every military decision, behind every alliance and provocation and counter-provocation, there is a divine hand directing the timing and the trajectory. Now look at the current situation and ask yourself what hooks in the jaw look like in February of 2026. Because the mechanisms are not hidden. They are operating in plain sight. A 10-day ultimatum from the President of the United States. That is a hook. Iran cannot ignore it. Ignoring it risks military strikes. Accepting its terms risks regime collapse. There is no comfortable path. The nation is being dragged toward a decision it does not want to make. A demand for complete dismantlement of Iran's nuclear infrastructure, terms that Iran has declared publicly it will never accept. That is a hook. The gap between what is demanded and what Iran will concede is unbridgeable. And unbridgeable gaps do not produce peace. They produce escalation. A military buildup of over 120 warplanes, 2 carrier strike groups, and airborne command and control systems positioned within striking distance of Iranian territory. That is a hook. Iran cannot allow this buildup to go unanswered without appearing weak. So it responds with joint drills in the Strait of Hormuz, which in turn confirms the threat assessment that justified the buildup in the first place. Escalation feeds escalation. Iran's nuclear breakout time compressed to weeks. That is the sharpest hook of all, because a breakout window measured in weeks means every day of inaction by the United States, and Israel is a day that Iran moves closer to a nuclear weapon. That compression creates a sense of now or never urgency that drives decision-making toward preemptive action. And preemptive action against Iran is precisely the kind of trigger that could activate the entire proxy network and escalate into a multi-front regional war. National pride. On all sides, Iran's supreme leader has staked his legitimacy on defiance. Netanyahu has staked his legacy on preventing a nuclear Iran. Trump has staked his presidency on being the dealmaker who succeeds where others failed. No one can back down without political cost. And when no one can back down, the hooks pull everyone forward. Sanctions that cripple Iran's economy, but also create desperation that makes reckless action more likely. That is a hook. Proxy networks in Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen that can be activated with a single phone call from Tehran. Those are hooks. Energy markets that amplify every military movement in the Strait of Hormuz into a global economic event. That is a hook. Each one of these pressures operates independently, but together they form a system of interlocking hooks that pull nations toward confrontation regardless of whether any individual leader has decided they want war. The decision gets made for them by the accumulated weight of commitments, alliances, red lines, and countermoves that cannot be unwound. Sometimes war is not chosen. It is triggered. One miscalculation. One drone strike that kills the wrong target. One proxy attack that crosses a previously unspoken line. One intercepted missile that fails to intercept. And suddenly, nations find themselves in a war they did not plan, at a time they did not pick, dragged forward by hooks they did not see until it was too late. That is what Ezekiel described 2,600 years ago. And the hooks have never been tighter than they are right now. But before I go any further, there is a critical piece of this prophecy that must be addressed. Because there is one condition in Ezekiel 38 that the current situation does not satisfy. And if I skip over it, I lose the right to ask you to trust anything else I have said. This is where intellectual honesty matters more than dramatic tension. And ignoring it would be dishonest. The alignment is real. The coalition is assembling. The hooks are tightening. Every element I have described is operating in real time. But one condition has not been met. And without it, Ezekiel 38 cannot be fulfilled. Ezekiel 38:11. And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates. The invasion happens when Israel is dwelling safely, at rest, in unwalled villages, without bars or gates. That is a description of a nation that has let its guard down, a nation that believes the threat has passed, a nation that feels secure. That is not Israel right now, not remotely. Israel is on high alert. Multi-front war preparation is underway. Northern border readiness is at maximum. Missile defense systems are activated. The Prime Minister has publicly warned about imminent threats. The IDF is planning preemptive strikes. This is a nation bracing for impact, not resting in peace. And that distinction is prophetically critical. Ezekiel 38 does not describe an attack on a vigilant Israel. It describes an attack on a complacent Israel, a nation that has been lulled into a sense of security, perhaps by a peace agreement, perhaps by international guarantees, perhaps by the exhaustion of its enemies. This is not fulfillment. This is not the invasion, but it is familiar. The pattern is assembling. The nations named by Ezekiel are aligning. The pressure mechanisms he described are operating. The only condition remaining unfulfilled is Israel's state of security. And that condition could change with a single agreement, a covenant, a deal, a peace framework that convinces Israel to lower its defenses. The stage is being set. The actors are positioning. The alliances are forming. But the curtain has not risen. And here is what separates responsible prophecy study from reckless speculation. Recognizing the pattern does not require claiming the moment. We can say the alignment is real without saying the invasion is imminent. We can acknowledge the convergence without setting a date. We can watch with discernment without watching with panic.
Many seem to be confused because they do not understand the book of Revelation. However, what if there was an animation showing the entire book? Well, we created that. And to watch that, click here.